All right, hey, kick this thing off. Welcome to DenverScript. Yeah, everyone's fucking fired up. Great. Yeah. Who's a first timer?
Oh, sweet.
Wow. All right. Sad turnover, but welcome. So these things are not possible without sponsors, and this section got a little longer, so I apologize. I'll try to go through this faster than I usually do. So Code is sponsoring the venue here. Yeah. Ghost Check sponsoring the pizza. Yeah. Randori is now a new Open Collective sponsor, so I'll talk about that here in a second. But thank you, Randori. Yeah. Fucking right, Randori. Also, Front Masters. So we give away three-month subscription trial things. It's worth about $100, so big deal. And we'll be selecting people for that, and I'm sure if you've been here before, you know how we do that. If not, you get a lesson today. Also want to thank other people who have been in part of our Open Collective contributors. Garrett Dawson gave us $50 plus $5 every month. Thank you, Garrett. He's also a co-organizer. Matt Webb gave us $50. Damn, that's a nice guy. Kylie Stewart, she's speaking next month, actually. She's also now a monthly contributor, so thank you, her. And Randori was kind enough to give us $250 towards our operating costs. So what does Open Collective mean? That means we're now non-profit, basically. We can take money in as donations, and we tell you what our expenses are, everything once you contribute. So it's 100% transparent. But sometimes we lose sponsors. It helps us cover food costs. Like I've spent thousands of dollars opening this thing over the last 4 years, covering food and other operating costs, and so have my other organizers. So just helps us cover those costs. Also, eventually we'd like to not have a laptop as our streaming source and get a little camera or something. So it's to help improve the meetup as we go on, and people that are not able to join us today and watching the live stream, hopefully we give them a little better show. So it's opencollective.com, DenverScript. If you yourselves cannot contribute, talk to your companies. Get them to donate the big bucks. So that's my sales pitch. Thank you. So little section we like to call what's going on in JavaScript land. I'll head over to the head. I can't work on that.
I'm the director of what's going on in JavaScript. Titles are free here, DenverScript. So, all right, guys. So, if you guys haven't been here before, what's going on in JavaScript land? What we always do every time I'm going to kick this off is we go through, if there was a new Chrome release, we go through the new DevTools highlights there. So, because in terms of what's going on, I usually get really excited about it. So, everything we're going over here to release onto the video will be linked. All this stuff that we're going to go over and things that people raise their hand about and all of that is all going to be linked on the meetup page in the comments thread for today. So don't feel like you have to write a bunch of stuff down if you want to look it up. Also, these things that I'm going to go through, I'll talk through them a little bit, but that highlights video goes through all these things and also has code samples and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. So anyway, so Chrome 74. So a common theme that we've been seeing for a while now with the new DevTools is they've been doing a lot of stuff with nodes and the DOM highlighting and doing smart highlighting and stuff like that, and a lot of stuff on their audits. So not surprisingly, we have stuff from there again. This is pretty cool. In DevTools, if you look up something on the right-hand side where the CSS properties are, and you hover over any of these different properties, it will highlight every element on the DOM that's affected by that thing. So that's pretty cool. So if you're like, oh, what is this margin effect? You'll see the preview highlights all the different ones that are affected by that specific margin attribute. So that's pretty neat.
So if you work in a legacy code base that Bootstrap is your enemy, that will be very helpful.
Audits improvements, like always. Oh, this one's pretty cool. A new audit score that you get is for tap target size. So specifically, since everything's moving more to being responsive onto mobile, they give you a heads up on like, hey, this is this percentage within compliance of recommended tap targets for your links when they resize to mobile. There's also new audits on progressive web apps. In the network tab, binary WebSocket messages will appear there. Area screenshots is really not that cool. Like it's the same way how you can do like on a Mac, like Command Shift 4 or whatever, and take a screenshot. There's now like keystrokes you can do to natively do it inside of Chrome if you don't want to use an external one. It's kind of cool, I guess. Another thing they've been doing for a while now, if you guys didn't already know, they started adding filtering and negative filtering to the network tab. So you can do, again, this is obviously it's Google, right? So they've been building in a lot of their search logic from like the actual Google search into the things that you can filter your network income and outcome messages. So one of the ones you can do now is, where'd it go? Service workers specifically. You can go and see of all of these happen, which ones are specifically service workers. Performance panel, just some UI improvements there. Really long tasks have a red triangle, and it tells you about first paint. And then what they usually do too, I suggest you guys watch these videos because aside from going over the actual release notes for the new stuff, they regularly highlight some little fun bonus tip of things that have been in DevTools for a long time, but that are kind of overlooked but could be kind of helpful. This one's pretty neat. If you click on the little GIF here, in DevTools, if you look at, this is already there, if you look at this little, the big Maximus. Oh, that's the whole video. The center there. So it's really, really blurry, but if you hover over a color and you shift click, it'll change it from hex to RGB to HSL. So instead of having them find a website to convert it, that's already built into DevTools right now. All you have to do is just shift click on it. So yeah, pretty neat. So anyway, as usual, that's what I'm excited about in JavaScript land, our new DevTools things. So along those lines, what are you guys excited about? Oh yeah, Kyle, firsthand.
So related, coming up in Firefox, this isn't specifically JavaScript, but you're going to start being able to see more information about CSS properties. So you can say, hey, this isn't happening because it was overridden by this thing for these reasons.
Oh, cool.
So you're going to start getting more detailed explanations about why a particular CSS property is being applied to an element.
Nice. So I don't have to Stack Overflow as much.
Yes.
Sweet.
Super cool. Awesome.
Things that were already on here, I'm assuming this was you, Mike.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's been me for months. Yeah,
Cool.
I have no update on that.
You also put this one there.
Yeah, just to spite you.
Node 12 is out. Sweet.
Node 12 is out. I can't tell you more about it because I just saw the tweet. And I was like, sweet. That just means 11's now my LTS.
So I guess I jumped the gun a little bit. So those are the things we had. So now, what else are you guys excited about? Yeah, CJ.
So Vue.js 3.0 is coming in like a year or so, and they currently have RFCs for all of the breaking changes in Vue 3.0
Oh, cool.
on GitHub. So if you care about what might break, you can comment.
Awesome. Sweet. Who else? And this could be anything like really these big things, these really big things are coming out.
We also have two sections.
Right.
Anything that's like high five moments, like just you're kind of like, fuck yeah.
So it's not necessarily even just like these huge language things that are going on. It could be either a new framework that you encountered. It could be one that like wasn't necessarily new, but you just started working with it and you're excited about it. So either like anything that's new to you, anything you're excited about, any new stuff you guys are working with. Yeah.
So my company recently started working with schematics.
Okay.
And so basically what schematics does, it just makes development much more easier. And so if you're working for like a large scale company, you definitely want your components and the structure or like directories to be consistent. So schematics really makes it a lot easier. Also for refactoring code, it makes it easier, or creating the library.
Nice.
So I'm really excited about that.
Sweet. Is there like a site or someone you recommend to check it out?
Yeah,
If you want to learn more.
So I found Brian Love's Angular schematic tutorial. So it's a very basic tutorial where you just create basically something that component that says like a lot.
Okay.
So very
Awesome.
basic. And Angular itself is a schematic, Angular CLI is a schematic. So yeah.
Sweet.
There isn't really much documentation on it yet. It's actually in the first one tutorial.
Awesome. Yes.
We've been using Narwhal's NX workspace at work for Angular, so it's cool because it lets you like reuse components across project level.
Mhm.
So if we have like 3 different app products in other 3 different repos that use the same component, you can have a shared library and just drop it into one of them and change it in one place and it goes
Oh.
across all repos, which is pretty cool.
Sweet. Awesome. And then, okay. Yeah, is there, just go straight to their projects, probably the best place to get more info.
So NRWL and the NX workspace is the
Awesome. Sweet. Who else?
Material.
Oh, sorry.
UI4 is out.
I'm glad you started talking because I just like didn't see you right there. Yeah.
Yeah, Material UI4 is in beta.
Oh, cool. And then those that usually you can download the beta version if you want to start playing with it, right?
Yep.
That's your install.
Yep, it's out, available, some new components, refactored API, pretty cool stuff.
Awesome. Yeah.
So React requests, if you guys ever have like massive lists and need to render, React requests is a cool tool. They revamped and have a new app called React Window that you can use a lot more lightweight. Just check it out.
Awesome. And then actually one thing that occurred to me with the Material UI 4 being in beta, for people that are relatively new that want to like kind of see how the open source process works, these betas are really good opportunities for that because you can download it and they usually have a bunch of issues open against them. You can see how that project tracks those issues and closes them out. So even if you want to sort of be a fly on the wall and see how these things get iterated, that's a cool thing you can check out.
Yes, question about that?
Yeah.
So as you're picking a project, if you have to use a particular framework or whatever, is there anything you can help us understand by looking at that when a beta comes out that we should look for to say, oh, it's an organic project, it's going really well, or this is a dumpster fire, I should probably avoid this framework.
Right.
You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And there's like a lot of little things, and actually that's an awesome question that I recommend that you kind of like when you're talking to people like after the meetup's over, be like, hey, what do you guys look for? Because I think everybody in this room is equally qualified to answer that. But like for me, like one thing is like how many open issues does it have right now? And that gives you an idea of like, okay, is this beta kind of stabilizing, or is it, you know, still very much in firefight mode and you want to use the release before? Also, when the beta began, right? Because if it began like yesterday and there's no issues, just because you haven't found them yet, right? It doesn't mean that there's not any issues out there. But yeah, so this kind of stuff, and I'll skip ahead a little bit. As you guys continue to make suggestions and stuff like that and point out stuff that you're excited about, this is all like things, keep an eye out for like who around you saying these things. These are things you can like then exchange with each other, right? Which is like one of our favorite things about this meetup is that there's like maybe 2 or 3 speakers at most up here, but then everybody in the audience has like something to contribute. So, you know, keep that in mind too.
GitHub stars.
Yes,
Totally.
perfect. That's another one too. And then for the project as a whole, look for GitHub stars, right? The ones who are following it usually, not always, usually implies some level of quality about that team or that repo.
Okay, so on most of my projects we've been using Subversion, but we're switching over to GitHub and Bitbucket for Git repositories. Is GitHub stars the idea that it's rated?
It's only, I don't think you can rate it. It's just are you following it or not? Which is like, oh, you get updates on like on when they publish new versions and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like a proxy for, it's like likes.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
right. It's a like which also subscribes to you and says like, okay, the more people that want to subscribe usually implies a higher level of quality of their team.
So maybe it's like Yelp or people that kind of rig the system and say, oh, this is the best project ever. And it might be.
Yeah, so don't pick them off GitHub sources.
Okay.
Thank you. Also, how active are their contributors? That's huge.
Yeah.
Because if it's like been 2 months since an active issue's been looked at, then nobody knows.
Well, that was a solid tangent, which is good. Any others about anything at all? It could be something new that you stumbled across, or even just like you had a moment when you were writing code, you had like a high five moment. Yes, Matthew.
Recently switched over to React testing library instead of Enzyme. It was cool.
Say that again.
React testing library.
Oh, okay. No, I just couldn't hear you. I think you were mumbling. I think you're so excited. You don't want to give each word a little bit of space.
Turning into the president. We got political.
All right. Yes, Kyle.
This is like a question. So Microsoft like announced that they're coming out with a second JavaScript-esque language. What is it? Can somebody?
Hold on. The question should be why.
Yeah, well,
No,
sure.
There's a trick question. You ruined the trick answer.
Does anybody know anything about it? Is it Busque?
You saying Microsoft?
Yeah.
It's because they no longer have like some to tinker with. Now that they got rid of IE.
Right. And like Edge is barely a toy project at this point.
It's Chromium, at least in Alpha.
Right, nobody knows anything about Bus. Well, there's a new programming language that's awful goddamn lot like TypeScript. So.
It's like ask the question and call them himself. It's like, I know the answer. Anyone else? Oh, come on. Give us like one high five moment, one like really cool thing that happened to somebody this month. That you were like doing something. Yes, you. Yeah, go ahead.
There's some sweet web scrapers that are just Chrome extensions. Use those on project this week.
That's awesome. What's which one do you see you like the best?
Webscraper.io is the one that I've been using.
Sweet.
I don't have to know much about it. There's some tutorial videos that we do follow. Webscraper.io.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, because web scraper is usually all by hand and very brittle, so that's really cool. Sweet. Anyone else? Anything else? Okay, so for those of you that contributed, thank you very much. We have 3 front-end masters trial memberships that we'll be giving out today. So for those of you, how many people will we give it? That's fine. Okay, several. If you contributed, come at the end, and then we'll give out some trial memberships. 3, maybe we'll just give them probably to all of you. So just come on up at the end, and if you're interested, we'll give it to you. Front-end Masters is a really, really cool site where they do all different kinds of instructional videos, going from introductory topics to really deep dives. So even if you're like a mid or senior level programmer, there's stuff on there that you might find interesting as well. It's like $30 a month. It's like $100 value for that trial. So yeah, thank you guys for contributing. Those of you who are interested by that, next month, come with anything at all that you're excited about. We have a very low barrier for what we consider
Try and
good
keep
solution.
it somewhat to tech.
Yeah.
Not just anything. But
Anything at all in tech. But yeah, because again, to finish what I said before, the whole point of this segment really is to get you guys thinking about like stuff that other people are up to and chatting with each other at the end, because we have a lot of smart people in the audience. We just can't get every one of you up here every time. So
Is the link to that document shared on the meetup?
yep, it'll be on the meetup conversation.
Beforehand, so people can add stuff before the meeting.
No, we don't usually, because it's kind of fun to everybody say it out loud. But yeah, but good point. That being said, if you have something you want to submit, but you're like super shy and don't want to say it, you can message me on Denver Devs, and I'll throw it in there as a proxy thing. I'm Guillermo on Denver Devs. Okay, thank you. Moving on.
all right. Job announcements. If you have a job, please come up to the front and announce it.
Yeah.
That's right. You have to come to the front of the class.
Oh, hello. Thank you, Matthew. So, hi, my name is Kyle. I'm about to speak in like a couple minutes. Also, I'm an educator at this place. If you are interested in pursuing a career in tech education, please come talk to me afterward. You talk to me or you talk to that guy over there. His name is Josh, and he is raising his beer in the air. This is like a very satisfying, rewarding career. It is education focused, not tech focused, but if that's the thing you're interested in exploring, I'd be happy to talk to you more about it.
Sweet.
How's it going? I'm Matt. I'm a front-end engineer at a place called Humbud. We do super cool stuff with content. We're hiring a machine learning engineer, sales engineer, full stack engineers. That's mostly code work for Node and service layer, and like lead quality assurance engineer, and a lot more roles. So if you're interested, come talk to me. I've got a couple of colleagues back here, Chris and Elijah in the back. Happy to talk and see what's a good fit. Sweet.
Hi, I'm CJ. I work at a company called 303 Software. We're a consultancy. We build apps for startups, big companies, just people that need them. And we are looking for someone, it's not clearly defined yet, but we're looking for a senior JavaScript full stack developer. So if you're in that, come talk to me. No, yeah.
Go Spot Check is still hiring, even though we let go of people last week.
Not many more people to hire, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was looking for another friend for my team, but they took that position away. So if you're a DBA here, randomly, we could totally use a DBA or iOS. No? Okay.
Hey, my name is Connor Hindley. I work at a company called Tanium. We are a cybersecurity systems management company that works on some of the biggest networks in the world. Looking for senior full stack software engineers. Colleague in the back here. We're based out of San Francisco and Durham, North Carolina. We have a growing presence here. Looking for some more.
Who else has a job to announce?
So I'm Greg Ostrowich. I actually run the Java users group. I do more Java and Python stuff. But I do some JavaScript work. One of the organizations at CDOT is going to be hiring, I don't know if it's an intern position, but if you're interested, I told them to come promote to you guys because a lot of it is like Google Apps Script stuff, JavaScript stuff, and some other technologies that would be a good fit for you. So go to the state of Colorado to look for it, just Google State of Colorado Jobs. And this would be at CDOT, but they'll be hiring a staff that I think you guys can fill. So good luck. Hope you check it out.
Anyone else?
So I was thinking one thing, for those of you that came up and we're talking about job opportunities, if you want to after either message Matt or in the conversation thread for today's meetup, make sure that you put your contact info and how people can apply. Because a lot of you introduce yourself and your companies, but didn't give contact info. So if you don't catch it from there or we have to leave early, we'll have them post there and you guys can get the info there.
All right, so everyone that announced the job, please raise your hand. People looking for jobs, go look at those hands and go talk to them afterwards. All right, move along. So call for speakers. Anyone can speak at this. So please, if you're interested in speaking, please ping me, Mike, or Guillermo. You're on the Meetup channel or in Denver Devs, Twitter, whatever. If you can't get a hold of us, something's wrong. But basically, we have a form we now have people fill out, and we'll figure out if the talk will work for this group. So far, I have not declined anyone. So
What's the time frame? I mean, it sounds like there's a couple talks. I just want to know.
yeah, we are already booked for next month, and then June. I think we still have one slide.
I meant when you give a talk, what time frame are you looking for how long the talk should be?
So we have two slots. One, the first talk is a short talk, which is 8 to 10 minutes, or 5 to 8. I forget.
Yeah, around 8.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Okay. Let's see, it's straight. And then the longer talk is 20 to 30 minutes.
And then that being said, for those that are relatively new, short talks are a great way if you want to get comfortable with talking to people. You can do some research on a topic, do an overview of something, and then in 8 minutes you're done and you're gone. Right?
Also a little disappointed in Kyle right now. So also Develop Denver is coming up in August. If you've never spoke at a conference and you want to, it's an amazing place to try it out. And also we are going to be trying to funnel some of those talks as guest speakers here and other meetups, just so people can kind of vet out their talk. So you want to give a talk at a conference and have a place to test it out? Awesome. Well, I think that's it. Now we have our first talk. It's what to test.
What should I test?
Same thing.
Kyle! Now's a good time for one more pizza or beer. Yeah.
And inevitably, it takes me about 3 or 4 tries to get the USB-C to work at this place, so.
Oh, really? If you want more beer, you can go more than that.
You're gonna need it. Well, it's because I'm using the company backup program instead of my Linux thread. Do either of you know, how do I get the Chrome to go away? F? Oh, I have Vimium on. Hang on.
Do you get online?
Yes.
It's add one, and then welcome to your own folder.
F isn't working.
Is your Vim still on? I saw that little thing pop up.
Yeah, it's excluding everything. Oh, no, it is. Jesus. I don't.
Open a new tab. Chrome.
This is Firefox.
About extensions, yeah. Or the you go to
CJ! I don't know how I ever lived with that.
All right. Coberly, everybody.
Aloha. So, my name is Kyle Coberly. So a little bit about me. I'm an educator. I teach at this school, and before that, I was the faculty director for an organization called Galvanize for about 3 years. Real quick, raise your hand if you've been a part of an educational program that I've been involved with. Hey, holy shit, an awful goddamn lot of you. So good to see you all again. So I'm a business dork. I have a technical MBA, and also I'm the executive director for a fine organization called Develop Denver. Who's been to Develop Denver before? Excellent. So I would like to see a lot more hands this year, and I've got a good incentive for you. You have approximately, well, I'm going to lie and say like 4 hours or so, but really it's until I get the change pushed up tomorrow morning sometime. $100 off tickets. This is a 2-day event. We give you booze, we give you food, and we give you 2 days of workshops, talks, all kinds of crazy stuff. The most important thing is community. It's like this, but with about 500 people. And tickets are $149 today. They become $249 tomorrow. DevelopDenver.org. Check that out. And I'm a software developer. I started out as a DBA. I do lots of front-end stuff. I do lots of back-end stuff. I'm one of those full stack developers that keep talking about. And what I want to talk to you today about is what do we test? We've talked a lot, like a bunch of different, these kinds of events about how to write tests. And that's generally not that hard. It's not hard to write a unit test. It's not hard to write an end-to-end test. It is hard to figure out what we want to test, what makes this useful. So if we look at this code, for example, we're getting an insurance premium factor. So an insurance premium is modified by how old you are, for example. So if you're between 18 and 24, your insurance premium factor is high. It's 1.75. You're between 24 and 60, that's our baseline. That's a 1. And then if you're a senior, a little bit higher, 1.35. Cool, so if we're looking at this, we need to figure out what from this do we want to test. So, like right off the bat, you're like, well, maybe we test the first one, maybe we test the second one, maybe we test the third one. So that kind of feels a little imprecise. And you may be wondering, is there a technique that I can use to better figure out what things that I need to test? Well, yes, there is. So I'm going to introduce you to a concept called equivalence partition boundaries. So if we visualize the range of data that we're working with, this is probably how we do it. We have the first bucket, the second bucket, and the third bucket. So those are what we call, shoot, what did I just do? Zoom presentation, there we go, save. So we call these equivalence partitions. The reason we do this is that things within that partition we generally assume are equivalent. So for example, if we test that we get the correct answer with 27, we probably don't also need to test 28 and 29 and 30. Those are equivalent because they're expected to produce the same result. The last part of this, the boundaries, are the actual things that divide these two, divide a partition from another partition. So if we look at this exact same thing, and we try to figure out what test cases we need, we probably say, all right, the bottom of that first partition is 18. So we should probably write a test case for that. And then our next one is we want to write one for 23 also, because it's at the boundary. And then right on the other side of that boundary, 24. So if 24 is the boundary, we want to test on either side of this. Because we're doing that like less than equal to, or the other way around. Like that logic, that's probably one of the easiest things to screw up when you're doing implementation. Whether or not it's less than, or whether or not it's less than or equal to, or greater than, all those kinds of things. So since those are such high risk areas to screw up, that's why we want to write the test. The reason we're writing all these tests to begin with is to give us confidence in the code base. So we do these, we get more confidence that we can change things and not break the implementation. So likewise, 59 and 60 are probably good test cases. Doesn't work at 59, we get the expected result. We get it at 60, that works. And we're also testing within those partition boundaries also. So we don't also need to test 65, we don't need to test 70, we don't need to test 40. We have more confidence that all of those work. So some other things you might consider depending on your application are things outside the boundaries. So does 17 work? More generically with numbers, we might think of things in terms of like negative number, 0, positive number. And then another one that might be good to test, again, depending on your application, max safe integer. So probably not in this case. I don't know that we need to test for somebody who's 1 billion years old, but it's conceivable that we have something that we want to know what happens when we go over an integer boundary. That doesn't necessarily need to work, but doesn't throw an error. Doesn't just wrap around and start going negative numbers or something. So if you're in a situation where like it would be useful to know what happens in that case, those would be valid test cases also. So what do we get from doing this? So I hate this code. I really, so this is taken from an outstanding book that I highly recommend. It's called Developer Testing by O'Reilly. And this was in their chapter on equivalence partition testing. I was looking at this, I was like, oh, what a great example of this. And then I realized the last talk that I gave was about how much I hate conditional statements. And this is a big gnarly conditional. Cool. Well, if we write these test cases for this and test these equivalence boundaries, now we can make it like this. And you may be going, Kyle, you took such simple code and made it complicated. Well, did I? Because what I did is I separated out the logic from the data. Now I have insurance premium factors attached to age groups. I have a way to define age groups with a minimum age and a maximum age. And I have a way to get age groups based on when I pass an age in. And now, if I look at that get insurance premium factors thing, all I need to do is call get insurance premium factors and pass in an age. So, for people who saw that last talk, I took the cyclomatic complexity, brought it from 5 to 1 in just doing that. So I would call that simpler code logically, even though it's much longer. And the most important part of that for this talk is these same tests will give me confidence that by expanding this out and simplifying logic and all these kinds of things, I didn't actually break the implementation. So that's why we do that. All right, so real quick, some other things that would be examples of equivalence partitions are with strings. You generally want to check something like a string that has something in it. You might want to check null if your function accepts nulls in place of strings. You probably want to know what happens when you do that. You generally don't need to test like a variety of different strings, but something that you might consider if you have an application that, for whatever reason, accepts different encodings. Maybe you have international users. You might want to know what happens with all the different kinds of string encodings you might get. With numbers, so we just took a case where we had like very specific numbers we were working with. More generally, a negative number, 0, a positive number, and your lowest allowable number and your max allowable number are things where you want to have some confidence in the behavior. For collections, nothing in the collection, one thing in the collection, many things in the collection. Those are things that you might want to check. And this idea extends beyond just like basic data types to something that's domain specific. So this could be things like our insurance premiums. Well, those have age groups. So do they work at the boundaries of the age groups? It could be things like gender. If you're dealing with male and female, if you're dealing with more than male and female, those are things that you probably want to write test cases for at the boundaries. And like you probably wouldn't do it in that case because it's not continuously variable, but I don't know, maybe it is in your app. Those are things where you want to figure out where the equivalence partitions are. Or, noted. Oh, I thought I was getting like shoehorned off the stage.
Yeah, Mike Weber's here.
So,
From outside, get out.
you're done, buddy. So it could also be things like, all right, the mileage on your car. There's different categories that put you into different buckets. So you figure out where the partitions are on those, and you test at the boundaries. So that's all I got to say about that. Thank you so much. And then, Matt, do you want me to introduce Arjun?
You want to take questions?
Oh, yeah, shoot, yeah. Questions?
No questions. I'll go. Are there any JavaScript tools or frameworks that let you, for doing partitions, or maybe for some domain-specific stuff that everybody always uses, that we could take advantage of? I like this idea.
Sure.
If I can reuse stuff instead of hand-coding, those partitions in my stuff.
Yes. Well, in JavaScript,
Or any framework.
sure. So like one that immediately comes to mind is a tool called Fitness. Fitness is a way that you essentially write a spreadsheet of where all of these things are, and then it will generate tests for you. This is like a fairly old tool. It was built by Uncle Bob. It was an agile signatory, and
honestly, that's why I was asking, because
Sure.
I follow Bob Martin,
Right.
and so I know about this kind of stuff.
Right.
I didn't know if we had that available, so it's here.
Not that I'm aware of. The closest that we probably get to that is Gherkin, but it doesn't quite do this equivalence partition thing. Cucumber is the JavaScript Gherkin implementation. But the idea there is that like your business stakeholders can write these test cases themselves, and so you can put them in charge of figuring out what the equivalence partition boundaries are, not you, because you as the developer may or may not know like where the insurance premium factor part of this is. And so if your business stakeholder does that, then that closes a loop. JavaScript, as far as I know, does not have killer tools for that. Java, which I know sucks in every other way, does have fairly robust tools for that. Awesome. Other questions? Damn, I explained that well. Yes. Okay, hit me.
So, how does this like kind of factor into like using like Jasmine? How does that?
Sure. So I would say this is a companion to an exploration of a deeper explanation of tools for writing tests, writing assertions, and running tests. So Jasmine is a test running framework. And so you would say, all right, I know I need to write these 5 tests for my equivalence partition boundaries. In this framework, I do it this way. I pull in this assertion library to do these things, and I run them with this tool. So that's where that would fit in. Good question. Cool. What else? Going once. Yeah.
Sorry, I was like doing stuff.
No, no kidding.
A rating. So the rating of like that scale of 5 to 1.
Uh-huh.
Like how things like fail.
Oh, sure. Cyclomatic complexity. So I talked about this at the node meetup a couple months ago. Cyclomatic complexity is how many possible paths there are through your code. So if we look at this, possible ways that this code could run. We come in through there. We end up with this first test case. We come up with a second test case. We come up with this third test case. We come up with, there's no else on this. There's no default. So that'd be a fourth test case. And then on this one, maybe it's a cyclomatic complexity of 4. You can also say like an error or something like that. That probably doesn't count. All right, cyclomatic complexity of 4. Those are different ways that this code path could go and not touch anything else. So cyclomatic complexity of 4, that starts getting my heart going a little bit faster. Whereas if we look at the one that looked like way more verbose code, this one, there's only one possible code path. It has to go through that. So if we're confident that our data is sound and our data is sound, and this logic where we figure out like, okay, it needs to be no less than, but no more than or equal to this amount, like that logic we can test pretty thoroughly, a lot easier than we can the entire insurance premium factors thing. Now, all I need to do is make sure that that one code path works. So cyclomatic complexity of 1, much easier to test.
What are some tool sets to measure that?
There's a plugin for some of the code editors that will yell at you with your cyclomatic complexity and go, hey, you're being stupid, fix this. I've always done it by hand. I saw a hand back there.
We call it Play-Doh.
Play-Doh.
That will like give you a report on every function.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Yeah, how do you spell that? E-A-L.
Like, is it like the clay?
Oh, no, I was thinking, is it philosopher?
Oh, let's get quorum on this. Is it the philosopher or the clay?
Okay.
Okay, the philosopher Plato. P-L-A-T-O. All right. Anything else? Going once. Going twice. All right. Motherfuckers. All right. Are you ready for your deadline? I'm going to get low. I'm gonna get low. Are you ready? Are you ready to hear about web components? Yeah. I said, are you ready to hear about web components? Yeah. Cool. Arjun's here talking about them. Let's have a big round of applause for Arjun.
point out again for new people, relatively new to code who are looking to get involved, looking to give talks. Again, short talks are a good example or a good opportunity. And you notice in Kyle's talk, like how much of what he covered was not like fundamental level like code stuff, right? Like you don't have to like be crazy deep on some framework or some library or be like a senior engineer to like just research the topic.
Or you can be brave. Arjun, this is his first talk.
Hell yeah!
We'll see.
It's your first long talk, right?
Yeah, so I've done some lightning talks before. This will be my first real talk. So.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. So nice to meet you all. This is my first time at DenverScript. I moved to Denver back in September, so I haven't gotten a chance to show it to you guys yet. So I'm giving a presentation on web components. Some people may have heard of them, a lot of people haven't. So hopefully my idea here today is just kind of show it to you guys a little bit, and then you can kind of see if you're interested and then dive in more, and you'll recognize the words and stuff, and you'll know what you need to look at. And yeah, if you have any questions while this is going on, feel free to interrupt me. So the base idea of web components is it's 4 browser APIs, and the end objective is to create your own custom HTML tags. So I'm not sure how well you can read this. I kind of scared of that, but if you can see that, this is, you see hello DenverScript, but if you can see the code, and I hope you can, this is the Chrome inspector, and you can see that this is an HTML element. So it just looks like a div. We see that shadow root thing, we'll talk about that later, but we see things you understand like H1 tag. So fundamentally, this is just an HTML tag that the browser understands. And that's the key to web components. We now have the power to create our own HTML tags. So just to, before we dive into it, we got to talk about the motivation, like why is this a thing? So this is from a talk from the Polymer Summit. Polymer is Google's web components library. And this was Alex Russell, so he's a Google software engineer for the Chrome team. And back in, he said, early like 2010s kind of era, the Chrome team was looking around at all the different frameworks and seeing, hey, we're shipping a lot of code, all these frameworks are, what is the base things that everyone needs that the platform, aka the browser, can provide these framework people? So this is a snippet from his talk, but this is basically showing a jQuery thing that they did where to make your own HTML element. So all these different frameworks had to ship a bunch of code to the browser to all do the same task, which is make a component model. You know, in the Angular world, we're using Angular components, React world, we have React components. So all these frameworks have to ship to the browser code to make these elements. And now we're in a mobile world where phones are awful at doing JavaScript and people have to pay for data. So now we need to think about how much are we actually shipping to the user and how much can we just offload to the browser. So the whole idea behind their team, they got a team together and they looked at the landscape and came up with things like ES6 and that kind of stuff. How can we make web developers' lives easier? So motivation is to ship less code to the browser and also interoperability, which we'll talk about. So the first of the 4 specifications for web components called custom elements. And this is what people think about when they think about web components. They don't think about the other stuff. So custom elements is the web standard to create the HTML tag. So just kind of going a little bit line by line here, we see it's a class. So this JavaScript class extends HTML element. So that's the magic. That when the browser reads that, it says, hey, I'm trying to make a custom element here. So I take all the magic, DOM stuff that I do for divs and H1s, and I put it into this component. So then we call it constructor, and then we attach the shadow root. So we're going to talk about that a little later, the shadow DOM. And then we just put some, HTML on there. And then next we see connected callback. So all of us using frameworks, we're used to lifecycle hooks. ng on init, React has its own lifecycle hooks. Just different phases in the lifecycle of a component we can call code with. And so the last line is kind of the magic. So we call window.customelements.define. And we say, what do we want the HTML tag to be? And we pass it an ES6 class. So that's basically what custom elements is. It's associating an ES6 class with an HTML tag. So what do I mean when I say like, hey, it's just like a DOM element that the browser understands? When we can do all these different things that we're used to with regular HTML. So first, we just use it like it's an HTML element. HTML, like we're used to. we can create it using JavaScript with document.createElement, and then passing the tag name. And then since the browser understands natively what the web component is, it understands how to create it through JavaScript with that create element, just like any other, create element making a div. These last two is just kind of showing that you can use this. The beautiful thing about this, because it's like a native DOM element, the whole point of frameworks is they understand the DOM. And so when we throw this in to a framework, it natively understands, hey, how do I render this? And just, the first one's Angular, so you kind of just see like the Angular syntax for sending data, and the next one's Vue for how it, send data to a component. But React's not on there, and we'll talk about that a little later. So one of the fundamental parts about making this cool custom element that you guys want to make, you people want to make, is how do I pass data to it, and how do I kind of talk to it? So first one is attributes. So we're used to, when you inspect in the DOM, we see things like disabled or open. So those are like visible in the DOM to us, and those are called attributes. And so that's a good way to, set up the component when it's first starting up. And the catch with that is you can only pass in things like booleans and strings, kind of really simple data. So to do anything complex like send in arrays or send in objects, we're going to need to use what's called properties. So if you've ever done like document.querySelector to get the element and then do dots, and then like a property like ID or color, and then do equal to and passing it in, that's how you do it that's how you pass rich data like objects and arrays to our custom element. And just to jump back to this, we see the Angular and the Vue bindings. Those under the hood, the frameworks pass in them as properties. So that's what those bindings mean. So it works for Vue and Angular components and also for web components. So we talked about how it's a class that extends HTML element. You guys might have gotten, if you think about it crazily, you got real excited, like, hey, I can actually extend HTML elements that already exist and do some crazy stuff like make your own super fancy div tag. Unfortunately not. It's in the spec, and I believe Chrome, possibly Firefox has implemented it. But Safari, you don't have to read this, but basically a Safari engineer said, hey, we're never putting this in Safari, sorry. I don't even know how this got added to the spec. So you can use it, and there's a polyfill for it. Just understand that you have to use a polyfill, and you're kind of off the standards track there. So yeah, that's unfortunate, because that'd be really cool to have your div tag that, if your browser supported, upgraded to your super cool div tag. So yeah, no extended built-in custom elements in Safari. Forms. How can we make these cool things? Talk to forms. That is an open issue since 2015. They're working on it though. There actually been some. I believe it's in the Chromium code base at this point, so it's working. Just saying, from the 2015, you can kind of tell how long these standards tracks really take. Like this is on web components, which already took forever. And then how long did it take for them to realize they needed this? So just kind of an idea that this is kind of why frameworks were invented, because the browser doesn't have the capabilities that developers needed. So we have to ship all this code to the browser to make it work how we need it. The browser vendors have gotten a lot better than that. I think everyone's kind of becoming friends. Everyone's kind of implementing the standards together, except for the one we just talked about. So just kind of an idea of why frameworks are around. So Shadow DOM, this is the second part of the web component spec, and it's definitely the most complex. And I'm a CSS noob, I'll be honest, so I'll try to do my best, but this is something that all you CSS people are gonna love to dive into. Here, I don't know if you guys can see, but we have our HTML tag DenverScript, and it has a shadow root in it. And what a shadow root is basically a scoped DOM tree, and it's kind of by itself. So styles from outside won't go into the shadow root. So if you said, like, hey, style all H1 tags in my application with green text, that will not go through the shadow root. So you are kind of encapsulating your CSS. And also the styles defined in here don't leak out. So Shadow DOM is basically solving encapsulation of CSS. We no longer have to use these framework tools, which I believe most of them just generate, random class names to kind of solve this problem. So this is a native way to do it. And you get some side benefits, like this is more performant for the browser, right? Because when it sees an update here, it knows it doesn't have to update everywhere. So just a little performance thing like that. And just, again, following the idea that we're trying to ship code to the browser to make it so everyone doesn't have to build all these abstractions on top every time we make a new framework. We can just use what's in there already. So there is some ways to pure shadow DOM, and you need this because if we're making these reusable elements that we want to throw anywhere, we're going to need a way for our end users to customize them. So the first way is, this is basically a standard way right now, is CSS custom properties, also known as CSS variables. If you haven't played with them before, really fun. These will go through the shadow DOM. So do a lot of cool stuff, like have a theme at the top of your app, and that'll just go through all your components, no worries. There's now a new standard, and I believe this is about to ship in Chrome. It's not fully standardized, so I don't think the other browsers will do it yet, but it's part and theme. Again, I'm a CSS noob. If you like CSS, you'll love digging into this. This basically allows us to say, hey, what do we want to be able to be styled in our components? And so Monica, who used to work on the Chrome team, she did an excellent blog post about part and theme, so that's coming up. Basically a way to declare what you want to be, your component to be styled. How to style a component, I should say. So this is probably the most complex slide, but I'll try to go slow on it. So slots. So this is kind of, I have a component. How does the user of it pass DOM to it that they can use? So for example, if I have a header component and I want people to be able to put their own, login buttons and stuff while also saying where should it go on there, that's kind of what slots is. So I'm most used to Angular. So Angular, if you know, like ng content. Yeah, this is exactly that, except just standardized way. Yeah, not sure if you guys can read this, but so it kind of goes counterclockwise here. So we have our cool, better button, and we're going to pass in, a little image of a gear icon and then some text into our cool button. So that down here, this is kind of the representation of what our better button CSS is. See, we have a style, and then we have a slot name. So slot name, you can see here it says slot equals icon, and here we have name equals icon. So we can make things like, on the header, like if you want it on the left side, you can make a name slot of left. If you want on the right side, name slot of right. And then you just put the slot equals name, and they can, go where you want it. Or if they don't put any kind of name, it'll just go into the default slot. This is what happens at the end once a user passes in their own HTML. So what it does is so that's called the light DOM, just so when you guys see these words online. The image tag and the span, that's called the light DOM. And what shadow DOM does with the slot is it takes it out. It doesn't move the DOM, so you get all your styles and stuff. There's no like weird CSS affecting it, but it just renders it in the slot. So it's just a way where we can pass in our own DOM and then tell it where to render on our custom component. So we can think of doing this with like the header component. Or if we have a cool list thing where we want users to be able to customize what's in the list and pass in their own DOM elements, that's how you do the slots. So Shadow DOM is a JavaScript API, which makes it a nightmare for server-side rendering in forms. So I'll just briefly touch on this. It's kind of a prickly edge of it. So the framework library, I should say, that I use for web components called Stencil.js, and we'll talk about that a little later. But so how they handle it, just to kind of give you an idea of how this could be handled. Server-side rendering, because there's no server-side rendering renders to HTML, and there's no Shadow DOM HTML element, and the standards track said, hey, we're not going to do that. You frameworks need to figure it out. And so what Stencil would do for Shadow DOM is it renders all the normal HTML, and then when it boots up on the client, it'll use JavaScript to then move them into the Shadow DOM. Forms, so you can't, it's weird, forms can't see through the Shadow DOM, so if you have an input in there, they're not going to be able to see it. And so a hack that the Ionic team has done, for example, is they'll take JavaScript that will create an HTML input element that's hidden, and that's what you actually are interacting with, and then that just like proxies into the input in the Shadow DOM. So just kind of be aware that there's some prickly edges here. This is the third of the web component stack. So this is called the template. So this is the HTML template tag. If there's any Vue people in here, I believe this is used in Vue. At least I've seen examples with it. What this basically is it's a inert DOM. So the browser will read this template tag and it'll parse it, but it won't execute it. It won't do anything with it. It'll just parse it. And so in our original example for our component, we kind of did this like inner HTML thing. The problem with that is if you put 10 of those components on the page, the browser 10 times is going to try to figure out and parse that inner HTML. With this template, it just parses once, and then we just clone it in. So it's already been parsed by the browser, it just goes directly in. So it's just a really efficient way to make templates for things, where it only has to parse once. And this is the final part of the web component spec is HTML imports. Basically, the cool idea was, hey, we need a way to import HTML, same way we need to import JavaScript. Unfortunately, no other browser besides Chrome did, so they kind of threw it away, and I think it's even getting removed from Chrome. So they said they'll revisit in the future and base it off ES modules. Cool, so this is a browser API. These are browser APIs, I should say. So what is browser support like? Really, really good outside of Edge, but Edge is becoming Chromium, so we don't have to count that. But every other browser, you're going to get native. And if you're like me and need to support IE11, you can compile it down to ES5, and then they have polyfills and all that fun stuff. But sad face. Framework support. So this is important because a lot of us make money using frameworks. So how does this interact with that? So Angular. So there's a website, customeelementseverywhere.com. And so they take all different frameworks and they do tests like how well do you support web components. Angular and Vue 100%. React is probably the only framework that doesn't really play well with web components. They have like a pull request to try to figure it out, but this is actually kind of a weird thing. Like on Twitter, like the Google and Facebook engineers take shots at each other and stuff, and there's some real anger here. Like the Google people don't like the Facebook people because of this React not supporting web components. So it's weird. There's a lot of subtweeting going on for sure. But it's kind of funny to see, but also sad. I wish everyone could get along. So just to touch on React, because a lot of people use React. So we had the cool for Angular and Vue. It had the binding to pass in properties and data to it. With React, you have to use references, get a reference of it in JavaScript, and then poke in the data you want using the properties. So there's three main use cases I think web components really excel at or most talked about. So design a language system. So this is, if you're in a bigger company and you need to, branded everything. You need the, your company button with your colors and stuff. That is what a design language system is, just a component library that the whole company is supposed to use. So that's what web components, I think, is actually the best use case for it because it'll play in any framework. So we just have to write one set of components as a team, and any other team in our company, doesn't matter what framework they're using, they can use our components. Then you don't have to make huge design maps. You can make one-off shareable components like Monica, who I mentioned earlier with the CSS stuff. She made a really cool component where you put on the page and then it'll start raining emojis. So you can do any kind of component like that. Just the idea is it's a shareable component. Like you see a lot of these really cool component libraries, but then it's like, oh, it's an Angular library or it's a React library. That's the future. It'd be cool to move away. That's what we'd like to move away from. We'd like to just have one component library that we can use no matter what framework we want. Last one's full applications. This is actually a really debated topic. Google has made full applications of it. So actually YouTube is using an old version of Polymer. So that's fully web components. And Google Earth is also fully web components. So also if you guys check out the Santa tracker every Christmas, that is fully made with web components. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And why you would do a full application of web components versus Angular or React is I kind of talked about it earlier, but we're moving in more of a mobile world, and especially the developing world. They have awful Android phones that legitimately like really can't parse a lot of JavaScript. And our frameworks are just not designed for that. You know, we all develop on, you know, work might give us cool MacBooks and stuff, and we're just so isolated from that. But the truth is, you know, a lot of people are running around the world with like $100 or $200 Android phones, and they can't really do JavaScript. They just get thermal limited instantly. So we want to be more on the C++ side, right? We want to be on the cool, you know, standard path. So that's why you would do it. A full application of web components is strictly performance and bytes on the wire. Because if you have an app and someone clicks a link and it loads instantly, they're probably more willing to give you money. It's just how business works. If they can't use your app and it takes forever to load, then they're probably not going to give you money. So just to kind of touch on what companies are using web components, just so you guys get an idea. So Google obviously drove web components. They were the big people behind them. They use them everywhere. GitHub, actually, if you go to GitHub and you inspect like the times, so like if you go to a repo and it says, you know, this was last modified 3 months ago, if you inspect that, that's actually a little web component. So GitHub has a lot of open source web components that they put out there. Netflix, a lot of their internal, not a lot, I don't know how much, but some of their internal developer tooling is made with Polymer. So just kind of the idea of a reusable thing that they can throw around. A Salesforce, so I don't know much about Salesforce, but I know that it just came with a new component library called Lightning. This is also based on web components. A Tesla, just on Twitter the other day, one of the Tesla engineers saying, hey, we're building our design language system with web components. EA Games is a really cool example. They had a YouTube talk at the Polymer Summit, but all these different EA games that need their own microsite, you know, it has the same like sign-up forms, game information. It's kind of a standardized wrapper over their CMS system. So they just made them web components, and then it just takes a few days to customize those components. You can get a website out for a new game almost instantly. McDonald's, this is a really fun one. If you ever go to McDonald's, they have the digital displays with the menus. All of those menus with the digital displays, they're running Polymer web components. So you can take that burger and just put McChicken and put it anywhere, any website. Ionic 4, so they just released. So Ionic 4 is probably the biggest design language using web components right now. It almost certainly is. So they had a really nice system that they just came out with. So I'd check that out if you're interested in building hybrid mobile and web apps. You can also just make web apps. And I'll give a shout out. I used to work at Charter/AK Spectrum. Yep, I got my friend here from there. So yeah, I got there and I heard they were thinking about a new design library. So I ran into the meeting like, hey, we got to use Stencil. Like, we got to do web components. Because right now, they have to make components for every library. So that's an absolute nightmare. That just can't happen. It's so much money just being burned. So I got permission to say that they are building their new design language with Stencil.js, which we'll, I think, talk about in the next slide. So yeah, if you people are interested in checking out web components and want to build them, you could just do standard, you know, extends HTML element. These are some libraries I would recommend. Web components are supposed to be a low-level browser standard, so the idea was people would build libraries on top. So Stencil.js, this was made by the Ionic team. It's a compiler, so it takes in components that look like a mix of React and Angular, like it has JSX, but it has Angular as decorators, stuff like that. And then it'll spit out in a bunch of different formats of web components. So they have ones that'll automatically lazy load. They'll have ones where it's just a giant bundle that you can import to Webpack. They are working on it, and I'm not sure the full details of it, but they're making it so that it compiles to Angular elements, and it compiles to Vue, and it compiles to React. Because this is the standard, I would say, for companies looking to make a design language. They're all switching to Stencil. So yeah, Charter is an example of one. I'm not allowed to name other, but there's another big telecom also doing this. So I would check out Stencil. I got to be clear of my biases. I'm a Stencil community contributor, so I am biased. But I would check it out. It's one of the funnest things that I've ever worked with in web dev. It's just, it works exactly how I imagined it would work. And it's just super small, so it's great for our users. The second one's lit element. So this is Google's new web component kind of library. And this I would use for if you're just making a fun, one element that you just want to throw around and, be very high performance. I would use lit element. And what's special about it is it uses what's called lit HTML as its renderer. And that'd be a cool thing for someone to give a talk on. But how that compares to JSX. So JSX, it uses this thing called virtual DOM, just super simplifying things, but it takes the whole tree of the DOM and it compares it to the new tree, and then it does a diff on that to figure out, hey, what should this update look like? The innovation of lit HTML is it only diffs the parts that are dynamic. It won't diff things that are static and never change. Like if you have an H1 tag that's just always gonna be H1, lit HTML will never try to diff check that. So it's just kind of the next generation of JSX, so I would check that out. If you use Angular or Vue, they actually now are able to generate 2 web components. So if you kind of already have an existing code base and you don't want to use one of these fancy new libraries, but you want components that other people can use, you can take Angular, it's called Angular Elements, and generate a web component. Or you can take Vue, the CLI, and it'll take a Vue component and generate a web component. Cool, and that's it. So any questions?
A couple slides, you got a abstract root. What is that?
Okay, mode open. So yeah, this is kind of a very deep detail, but mode closed, they basically say never use this. Mode open, mode closed means that JavaScript and anything else can't really seed into it. So it basically doesn't exist. So if you think about like the video tag, it has all those controls, like the play button, the volume button. But if you inspect that in the DOM, you don't see any of those controls. You just see the video tag, and that'd be an example of like a closed shadow DOM, where the end user doesn't see what's hidden away in the shadow. Cool, great question.
One more.
Yeah.
Usually you said like Safari never supported. If you're good at it, we'll support it.
Sorry, yeah. Safari's never going to support the like extending built-in elements. Like you can't say extends HTML div element. You can only extend from HTML element. Yeah, so you can't make your own cool super div.
So what would you say is the biggest benefit of using web components? So if you're already using a framework, right, what would you say is the biggest advantage of using a web component versus just a really small or even like an atomic level just component of the framework, right?
I don't think there would be a benefit over using your framework code. So I think it really comes in when you have a team at like a bigger company that are making components for a bunch of different teams. That makes a lot of sense where, it doesn't matter what framework you're using, you can use these branded components.
That makes sense.
Yeah, also if you want speed, like if you're really just trying to hyper optimize, maybe, but the framework, you already got the framework there. So.
Cool.
Yeah, great question.
So would you say that we're moving more towards using web components versus frameworks? Like frameworks might be a thing of the past one day, and web components are going to take over.
I think that we're getting to a point where you don't need to reach for a framework. So, for example, if I'm making a consumer-facing web application that needs to be extremely fast, right? That's what I care about because I want an extremely fluid user interface. I would seriously think about doing a web components-based one. So when I think of a framework, I think the 2 big things are a router and state management. So there is a bunch of web component routers. The Ionic team even has one now. And also state management, you can use the existing stuff like Redux and stuff. So you got to be careful. Like your engineering team definitely needs to understand low-level DOM stuff a little more. I think if you had the people who are down for that, you get a huge benefit. If you're consumer-facing and you had like an e-commerce app or something that you want that's super fast, I think that's where. I think frameworks like the productivity is just so nice, and it's very easy to onboard and all that stuff. I think web components, because it's a lower level browser API, the engineers kind of have to be aware of things like what's the difference between an attribute and a property, which we don't ever really come across, so most people aren't aware.
It brings up another question too. So in terms of like accessibility, like would these be more accessible components than just a bunch of rendered JavaScript components?
I'm definitely new at accessibility, something I'm definitely trying to learn more about. I have heard, so the Rob Dodson, I believe that's the name, works at Google, but he's like the accessibility guru. I think he has said that things in the shadow root, like there's some weird accessibility stuff with that, so I would check into that. I think one of the benefits of web components though is because we're trying to get closer to the middle. Ideally, accessibility should be easier, but I'm not enough of an expert on that to say. That's a great question.
How does you compare just server-side rendering? So you're just sending HTML from the browser versus it sounds like this HTML plus JavaScript into a shadow root. How does that compare in performance and when you reach for server-side rendering versus these?
So server-side rendering, I'm not 100% convinced on the performance aspect of it. I think for crawlers and stuff, it's almost mandatory, or some sort of solution like that. Because with server-side rendering, we paint really fast, we get HTML really fast, but you still have to send the JavaScript to kind of boot it up. So, and also with web components, server-side rendering is probably one of the biggest questions. Like the Ionic team is doing so much work just to make that happen. So yeah, web components is probably not a great server-side rendering solution. Performance-wise, if you're both server-side and both, I think it would win in performance just because you have to send less bytes on the wire, right? The browser already has a component and a model built into it, so you don't have to ship, React element into it. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question. I haven't done server-side rendering before, so definitely a new problem.
It sucks.
Yeah.
Nice.
Alright, well, there's still beer in the fridge, so if everyone wants just to hang out and nerd out, let's do it. Let's do it!
If you submit something for JavaScript link, come on up and then we'll get that stuff. Thanks, guys.
That's the stuff.
What's that?